Good evening, everybody. This is Barbara Moore, and on behalf of Equine Collaborative International, I want to welcome you all to this amazing call. I am thrilled that we have such great participation, and it is a great honor to me to be able to introduce our two moderators for this evening. Lynda Logan has been an animal activist for better than 35 years, and she actually lived in New Jersey at the time she was involved with a bear research and education group. And since she has moved to Arizona, Lynda's been very active and with volunteering for wild horse rescues and is a core team member of Advocates for Wild Equines. Welcome, Lynda.
Thank you.
And our friend Scott Beckstead is joining us tonight also as a moderator. And Scott is a lifelong horseman who also has a legal background that he employs well in his use of defending not only horses, but animals of all types, wild and domestic. Welcome, Scott.
Happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Well, friends, we've got an amazing program tonight. What I think, you know, I've come to view these Equine Collaborative International presentations as really sort of a clearinghouse of all of the best ideas out there for our wild horses. And you know, we often talk about how badly needed a greater spirit of cooperation and collaboration is needed in this space. And I feel like these calls hosted by Barbara and Equine Collaborative International are probably doing more positive things in working toward that spirit of collaboration and cooperation than just about anything. And that's why I am so thrilled to be involved, and I'm honored to be here. And what a treat! We've got two amazing advocates. I have come to have an enormous amount of respect for both of these advocates, Craig Downer and Anthony Marr. These are people who have figured out a way to think outside the box, which of course is so badly needed. And, you know, it's going to take sort of a reimagining of the wild horse issue if we're going to, you know, if we're going to finally bring public policy into alignment with how we all feel about these amazing animals. So again, heartfelt gratitude. Barbara, this is an amazing amount of work for you. Every time you do one of these, I know how hard you work. And so on behalf of all of us here, I just want to tell you how grateful we are and really thank you for doing this. Let me introduce our two speakers, starting with, oh wait, go back to that Q&A. This is important. So this evening, what we're going to do is we're going to respond to questions that are written into the chat. Now, if past presentations are any indication, there will be far more questions than we will have time to get to. But what I will do is I will go through and find questions that I feel like really add to the conversation, and we will start doing, after Craig and Anthony both give their presentations, then we will go into the Q&A, picking from the questions that have been put into the chat. So we don't worry, you know, don't raise your hand and expect to be called on. Instead, write your question into the chat, and then we'll get to it after both Craig and Anthony have had an opportunity to give their presentations. Okay, so let me start. Let me introduce first Craig. You know, if you've had the pleasure of listening to Craig talk, you know what a brilliant thinker he is, and you know, he brings such good science to his perspective on wild horses. He is a wildlife ecologist specializing in wild horse and burros and Andean tapirs. The tapir, of course, is that animal that along with rhinos and horses, they make the Parasidactyla order, which are sort of the odd-toed ungulates. He has spent more than 40 years in the field, invested over 30 years gathering data on wild horses and burros on the range. Craig is extremely well versed and well published on wild equines and the challenges they face from biological, ecological, and evolutionary, as well as legal and political standpoints. This allows Craig to prove the positive contributions that horses and burros make to the ecosystems and how this relates to their deep-rooted native status in North America. Boy, that's a perspective that is so badly needed. And we need to become fluent in Craig Downer's way of thinking as we are making the case for fundamental reform. Okay, let's move on to Anthony. Again, another brilliant thinker. Anthony, I love listening to Anthony talk because he brings a totally creative way of thinking and honestly common sense way of thinking about how to deal with the issue of wild equines on our public lands. He's the originator of the Zero Roundup Marr Plan for wild horses. He's a renowned wildlife preservationist whose work covers the endangered species trade, as well as tigers, seals, bears, deer, and marine mammals. His intensive speaking, campaigning, and investigative cross-country tours have been supported by thousands of advocates in numerous countries, while his activism has earned him 2-hour interrogations by the Japanese police. Now that's a story I want to hear, Anthony. Yeah. And a back alley physical assault. I hope someone had their video camera out. He has also won a place of honor in the Champions of the Wild TV series, the Henry Spira Grassroots Activist Award, and Best All-Round Activist title. Great to have both of these gentlemen here to speak to us this evening. I'm really looking forward to their remarks. So remember, put your questions in the chat. We will monitor that, and let's move on with Craig Downer. Oh, and by the way, everyone, on the count of 3, mute your mics. 1, 2, 3, mute.
Oh, well, it's a great honor, and thank you so much for that build-up. I really appreciate that, Scott and Lynda and Barbara. This is really a great event, and I think we can really make a difference here. The title of my presentation is Reserve Design and Rewilding, the True Path Forward for the Restoration of America's Wonderful Wild Horses and Burros in their natural habitats. Today, in many places all over America, there is a desperate fight, really a war being waged between those who appreciate and honor the true role of the wild, naturally living horses and burros, and those who are loath to admit their true nature and fitting place in the world of nature. Many of the latter are people whose lives and goals in life have become too much about control and manipulation of the great rest of life, including all of the marvelous, vast, and various species and the diverse natural ecosystems they inhabit. Many of America's public lands livestock ranchers fall into this category. It would be unfair to admit other segments of our society have targeted America's wild horses and burros for herd crippling reduction and or alterations in their basic biology. The latter to render them mere token repressed vestiges. Many simply egg for their outright elimination. Though not all in this segment of American society are opposed to wild horses and burros, most definitely seem to be. So many of these are, as the saying goes, so full of themselves and seem to have lost touch with the most important capacity, the basic humility to admit one has yet much to learn and much improvement to make as concerns all of his or her relations. We need to ponder the Lakota greeting, including in relation to horse and burro kind. Mitakuye Oyasin, we are all related. meaning all the great family of life. With this send-off, I would now launch all life's ship of state upon a different course, one urgently corrected as to its direction. Here I refer to the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971 and its true spirit, meaning, and intent. Signed with a glowing send-off by President Richard M. Nixon, this noble and unanimously passed law was and remains a quantum leap forward for humanity, both morally and spiritually, as well as ecologically, because it shows that people can truly care about beings who share this wonderful earth home, are present in slightly different bodies and fill slightly different roles within the great community of life. And it is their very differences that allow them to complement other species and make for a greater whole. Horses and burros are highly evolved, anciently rooted and long-standing presences in North America. Here not only their species, but their very genus and even family have inhabited and been positively integrated for millions of years, dating back nearly to the close of the age of dinosaurs. Many of these horses and burros have taken a relatively brief time out from their natural roles to live and work together alongside our human species. And the plain fact is, we so-called civilized humans wouldn't be where we are today were it not for our several thousand-year partnership with horses and burros, which leads me to ask, isn't it now high time we humans do something truly good for horses and burros? And what better gift of repayment could we possibly give than to restore them to their rightful land and freedom, their rightful and appropriate natural habitats wherein they can take up again their own true roles in the world of nature and as long-term viable interbreeding herds. These would be habitats where they truly and justly belong and where they are very much needed. Their destiny is not to remain forever mere slaves of humans subject to disrespectful confinement and removal from their compatible and age-old habitat. In these ecosystems, they play keystone roles that enhance, embellish, preserve, and restore the life home for hundreds, even thousands of fellow co-evolved and co-evolving individuals and the respective kind. For these and numerous interrelated reasons, the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act is a true act of love because it shows that we humans care about another group of beings present in this world in slightly different form and recognize the value of this difference, this ecological complementarity, and furthermore, that in essence, we are all the same. In upshot, it shows that we truly care enough to share the land and freedom, the very life itself, with such wonderful and deeply earth-rooted presences as the horses and their cousins, the burros. Praise God. But what needs to happen today to restore the true intent and spirit of the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act? The solution is near and dear to my mind, as well as my heart, and it's called reserve design, and it's very akin to rewilding. It is a key tool of conservation science or biology and seeks to restore much needed knowledge, appreciation, and respect for horses and burros' true natures, as well as respect for the intricate life communities that are appropriate for them and in which they fulfill vital, restorative, healing roles that are of critical importance in today's world. Let's face it, this world is being overwhelmed and over-altered by our own self-centered species. But this is not how we humans should live. And let no one tell you that this is our own true nature. We can correct our course for the good of the horses and burros and their habitats, as well as for our own true good and fulfillment in life, as well as that of all this precious co-evolving life community with which we share the earth as home and place of learning and perfecting, both individually and collectively. Here are some of the basic elements of reserve design, and please remember that this is a branch of conservation biology or science that is developed over the past approximately 150 years as a response to what is alarmingly happening to our naturally living earth, also known as Gaia. This discipline has germinated in the minds out of the diverse experiences of many wise, knowledgeable, and concerned observers and ponderers of the natural world, including its wild horses and burros. These include knowledgeable and caring people who want to see these marvelous animals restored rather than to watch helplessly as they are targeted with warped disinformation campaigns in order to pseudo-justify their cruel and improvident elimination, or in order to, quote, achieve their near elimination from their rightful land and freedom, while reducing them to inhumanely altered and unconscionably repressed dysfunctional states, similar to those of most domestic animals today. Here are the points. One, let me take a little drink here. Well, I guess I'm all right. Carefully study the ecosystems in question, including both natural and human components, and determine where reserve design can best work and how it can best be implemented. You can refer to my reserve design proposals in the GoFundMe and in my book, Wild Horse Conspiracy, as well as my peer-reviewed article. I give 23 specific wild horse and burro herd area complexes I consider important for this project's initial focus. 2, incorporate natural barriers such as high mountains, deep canyons, or broad and raging rivers wherever possible to act as limits to wild horse expansion into areas where they would be targeted for persecution and elimination. 3, where deemed necessary, construct semi-permeable artificial barriers such as buck rail, log, and pole fences. These are very effective in keeping wild horses out of areas where they would come to harm, as through harassment, capture, and removal, or even killing by unsympathetic people. 4, establish buffer zones around each wild reserve with the cooperation of local land owners and government agencies at all levels. This would protect the core area within the reserve that would be left alone and highly safe for the wild horses and burros and their families. Buffer zone would have the effect of tapering off or attenuating wild horse and burro presence, as well as that of humanity, but in opposite direction. This could be achieved by, quote, positive reinforcement and mild forms of, quote, adverse conditioning that are techniques used by wildlife and citizen conservationists alike. Remember that horses and burros are intelligent and observant entities who learn where they are most safe and have their basic needs for survival met, and conversely learn where serious danger threatens their well-being and very survival. In other words, if we treat them with due respect, they will likewise treat us. In the process of establishing a reserve, including its core areas, connective corridors composed of unfenced and obstacle-free habitats would link similar wild horse and burro reserves. To accomplish this, it is important that persons who truly value and appreciate wild horses and burros and their place in the wild, including professional conservationists, zoologists, and ecologists, be given respected authority in determining the exact dimensions and conditions of any given reserve. This would include aspects such as the carrying capacity of land. Otherwise, we might see the same unjust situations that have developed today on BLM and Forest Service areas and territories where wild equid rights are largely or totally ignored, while the traditional wild equid enemies are allowed to dictate and decide on habitat resource allocations, known as AUMs, and population number assignments, known as AMLs, often putting these at absolutely zero, and could refer to chapter 3 of my book on this unfairness issue. This unwholesome favoritism of the public lands exploiters almost always results in genetically non-viable population numbers and woefully unfair and inadequate habitat provision, including forage, water, shelter, and other components essential for Mustang and burro survival and reproduction. These sort of, quote, squeeze plays lead to the decline and eventual demise of the last of America's once great wild horse and burro herds. Also, a natural, brutal, and invasive means of altering the wild equid's physiologies, including reproductive, such as gonocon, and surgical sterilizations of both females and males, as well as unnatural sex ratio skewing, favoring more males, are already becoming the norm on our public lands. In effect, these are forms of equid domestication that are entirely antithetical to the true spirit and intent of the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. Reserve design is the solution, for it adheres to the true purpose and meaning of this noble law, as well as that of several other laws, including the Multiple Use Act, the Endangered Species Act, the National Historical Preservation Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act. I have a good book for you if you ask me later on this that I've been studying. 5, and we must never forget how critical it is in the West to secure and, where necessary, develop adequate, pure, vital, and dependable water sources for the viably sized wild equid herds. This can be done by exercising the, quote, implied federal water rights that came with the passage of the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. And here I refer you to my interview with retired wild horse and burro specialist John Phillips that's in my book, The Wild Horse Conspiracy. 6, wherever possible, restore natural predators of the wild horses and burros, such as pumas, bears, and wolves. Recognize that there are many different mortality factors that affect wild equid survival, including diseases, poisonous rattlesnake bites, harsh weather, drought, blizzards, etc. That when the wild equids pass on in the wild, they contribute their mortal remains to the very ecosystems where they were born, lived out their lives, and died. It is only right that their mortal remains should be used by all the other species, from plants to animals to decomposers, who go together to form each unique and interconnected ecosystem. When the bodies of the wild equids are removed from such an ecosystem, either alive or dead, this ecosystem can be seriously diminished, deprived, and impoverished. Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act clearly states that wild horses and burros, quote, are to be considered in the areas where presently found, which means 1971, as year-round habitats, as the integral part of the natural system of public lands. Also, it should be mentioned that when BLM or Forest Service drastically reduces the equid herds, these agencies insensitively upset the mature social structures that limit reproduction by the immature and also educate the young in how to survive in each particular ecosystem. Both are critical functions of the older stallions and mares, jacks and jennies. These draconian roundups also unwisely set back generations of harmonious ecological adaptation. 7, allow the horses and burros to fill their respective ecological niches and to naturally self-stabilize within their circumscribed but complete and long-term viable habitat. This is crucially important. It's precisely what is not being allowed to happen by the BLM in the Department of Interior and the Forest Service in the Department of Agriculture, and very much contrary to the true spirit and intent of the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. In relation to this, Section 10 of this act should be activated to establish, through order of either the Secretary of Interior or the Secretary of Agriculture, long-term field studies of wild horse and burro herds and their habitats, so that we can learn in greater detail just how these naturally living horses and burros relate and contribute to their fascinating natural homes or ecosystems. The Heber wild horse herd on the Apache Sitgraves National Forest in the Mogollon Rim area of Arizona would be one ideal herd that should be named a study herd under Section 10, as should several other herds, including the Montgomery Pass herd on the California-Nevada border. Both of these have a high degree of natural self-stabilization. Through these in-depth studies, we could learn how these horses have become so harmoniously integrated within these unique ecosystems. Concerning the sagacious wild burros, I would recommend as Section 10 study herds, BLM's Marietta Wild Burro Range in Western Nevada near the California border, as well as Arizona's Black Mountain Wild Burro herd on BLM lands in around the old western town of Oatman. I have visited all of these herds and am impressed by their vast, wide open spaces, rich species biodiversity, which the horses and burros greatly maintain and enhance, as well as their scenic qualities. And as before, I again offer BLM and Forest Service by professional collaboration on these studies. This would be of crucial importance to realizing reserve design and consequently the honest and honorable fulfillment of the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. You can see more in chapter 2 of my book. 8, develop programs to educate the public about the positive aspects of wild horses and wild burros. Believe me, if this had happened since the beginning, we would be looking at a much more rosy scene today. These include restoring degraded ecosystems by A, building healthy soils that absorb more moisture, elevate water tables and recharge vital aquifers. B, dispersing a wide variety of intact seeds of diverse plant species, including many natives, with which these equids have co-evolved for thousands, even millions of years. C, helping other animals and plants by opening up water and food sources during winter and summer extremes. D, sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, a subject of my professional study. And E, mitigating and often even preventing catastrophic wildfires. The latter two are major ways of combating life-threatening global warming today. The list goes on. All of these and related contributions are points of truth and light that for far too long have been shamelessly ignored or denied. Such dishonesty must no longer continue. 8, develop win-win relationships between wild horse and burro herds and local human communities by providing supervised volunteer opportunities or even pay in exchange for monitoring and protecting these herds. Also, in order to establish complete and viable habitats for long-term viable herds, establish cooperative agreements for wild horses and burros to utilize private or other government agency land and resources as is permitted under sections 4 and 6 of the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act. Finally, promote moderate ecotourism enterprise so that they can flourish. These would guide people from our country and abroad in non-disruptively observing these wonderful creatures in their natural homes together with their symbiotic companion species. 10, foment field biology classes at all educational levels to observe and investigate wild horses and burros and their respective habitats in a respectful and non-invasive way. These would be spread out over many areas where wild horses and burros live so as not to overly impact any particular herd. Ecotours would similarly spread out. 11, near the end now. Reserve design would incorporate many similar and interrelated steps that would release the present stranglehold in public lands by the arrogant and insufferable wild horse and burro enemies. This could be accomplished in a fair and professional manner, including by exercising 43 Code of Federal Regulations 4710.5 and 0.6, closure or diminishment of livestock, and by adhering to true levels of population genetic viability in the thousands as is described by the world's greatest equine experts of the IUCN SSC Equine Specialist Group. You can see more about this in my book. Reserve design would topple the mafia-style monopolization of our public land, by which there are about 100 times more livestock on the public lands than there are wild horses and burros. And this situation is getting even worse. Even in the wild horses and burros legal areas, these national heritage species find themselves at the bottom of the totem pole, receiving only about 10 to 15% of the forage, the rest going to cattle and sheep ranchers, as is entirely contrary to the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act, which clearly states that their legal herd areas on BLM and territories on Forest Service land shall be devoted principally to the wild horses and burros themselves, not every other public land exploiter before them. And see my book. Finally, point 12. Reserve design would restore America's herds to truly long-term viable levels in the thousands and on commensurately viable habitats possessing all their survival needs, including migration route to and from summering, usually higher, and wintering, usually lower habitat. Reserve design would rescue these wonderfully, positively contributing North American native species from their present existential crisis in America, while at the same time do a world of good for us people. It would do so by helping us overcome our own and nature's worst enemy, our short-term narcissistic self-absorption and human speciesism or exclusivity. Would allow us to attain an imaginative and visionary release from our old, seemingly unchangeable, materialistic, minded, and uncompassionate selves. Thank you. I have some pictures here that I include with it. It shows the tiny little piece of the pie on the BLM land. And this was a band I took in the calico herd which we were trying to say when I was a plaintiff with In Defense of Animals and other groups. And there's these are these amazing sulfur Spanish colonial Mustangs out in western Utah, which should be preserved at a much better level. They're really inspiring to observe. So anyway, that's sort of my manifesto. So I welcome any questions or comments now. I have a lot more to say on this, as you can see. So I refer you to my various publications, and I have a little booklet called about America's Wild Horse and Burros Must Make a Comeback. And then my main book is The Wild Horse Conspiracy, and I'm doing an update on this, but it was updated not too long ago. Oh yes, and I have a new book that I just published. It's a lot of poems and philosophical, but it's an amazing book, if I do say so myself. It has a lot on the wild horses and burros, as well as the mountain tapers, but on everything that's related. It's called Wonder Streams of the Soul. And you can get that by that and my wild horse books by going to ccdownerbooks.com. All right, thank you.
Okay, so again, remember, if you have questions for Craig, put them in the chat and we will get to them after both Anthony and Craig have had an opportunity to speak. So Anthony, please take the floor and talk to us.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies, and everyone in the waiting room. I'd like to start back when I first got started in my own activism. And one of my early campaigns was to go to India to help preserve the Indian tiger, the Bengal tiger, which was on the verge of extinction. At that point, we gave them about 10 years or so before they would disappear from the wild. I expect slightly to differ because I always look at the bright side of things. And the bright side of things in this particular case was me. I was there to help save them. And I always do my absolute best, so I believe in my ability. So I believe that part of my work there has enabled the tiger to continue to be in existence today. And there was no proof of that. I would like to believe that that is the result of my work there, is to extend the remaining time span of the tiger. Now, when I was in India, I went did a lot of speaking at high schools and elementary schools, and in every single one, I formed a tiger conservation club. And this is one of the schools. And I had a lady in Vancouver here who made a 45-foot big tiger for me to take around the world, and it can admit about 100 kids inside. And so this is one of the schools I went to, and I was also in an environmental conference involving 140 countries in this particular conference in the Barefoot College in a town called Colonia. And so I was honored to be able to represent North America, because there were so many of us going to the conference. That happened to be there, otherwise I wouldn't even be there. And when I was working in India, one of the things I really enjoyed doing, and I went back twice more, was to work in and at the tiger reserves of India, and I concentrated on two of them. One was Kana, that's K-A-N-H-A, and the other one is Bandhavgarh. And there I had a first-hand experience working in a reserve, a wildlife reserve. And that is exactly what attracted me to Craig's work, because he was working on a reserve design for wild horses. I was in two reserves designed for tigers. And but there were things in common in that reserve, these two reserves that I worked in. And anybody interested in my work in there, go to YouTube and look at Anthony Marr Tiger, and there'll be some tiger videos of my work in India. And these reserves really are magical because they are like the original Garden of Eden before human beings began to come in. And in a country like India, that was almost miraculous because that country was just a cramp full of people and their own cattle, their own private cattle. It's not that there are no cattle in India, but they're not organized the way that the cattle is organized on public lands in North America. And the cattle are not allowed to go into these tiger reserves. Some of them may try to sneak the cattle in there to graze, but by law, these reserves are by definition a miniature version of the original planet before human beings arrived. And so, you know, in there are all the prey species are there: the cheetal deer, the sambar deer, the barasingha, the nilgai, the biggest bovine species called the gaur, G-A-U-R, which is related to the aurochs, which was the ancestor of the modern cattle, which are overrunning the American public lands. So obviously, based upon my experience, the cattle grazing in North America's public lands is an invasive species imported from the other side of the world, not necessarily suited to the North American public lands environment. And indeed, they're not. And but that's a big topic that suits Craig Downer more than myself, because I'm a physics graduate, and Craig is an ecology PhD. So so he certainly is towering over me in these things. But I can say is that all the species that originally existed in the world back then are represented in these tiger reserves, including all the predators in full force. And that included the tigers, the leopards, the cheetahs, before it became extinct in 1999 when I was there, or I just about cried my eyes out when I heard the news when I was actually in India that the Indian cheetah had become extinct in that particular year when I was there. So then there are also the canines, the wolves. There are the equivalent of the African hunting dog. There are hyenas. There are jackals. Everything was there. Nothing was taken out. Nothing was decimated. Unlike in North America here, when the hunters deliberately kill off all the predators to eliminate them as competitors for the ungulate species that they hunt, including deer and elk and moose and caribou and all that. And so it is something that is not existing in North America that I have experienced in both India and Africa. In Africa, the entire continent is like a reserve. There are no helicopter roundups of the zebras and the wildebeests. They are just kept in balance because of all the natural predators being in full force there: the lions, the leopards, the cheetahs, hunting dogs, hyenas, jackals. So I am really attracted to Craig's idea of wild horse reserves, and I would very much like to be instrumental in making that a reality in North America. And it does not necessarily have to completely wipe out the cattle industry, although I'm very much against it for more reasons than one. For example, we are all driving electric cars now because we want to get away from burning fossil fuels, and we should get away from cows and beef because cows are more efficient than cars in emitting greenhouse gases, namely methane. And on this reason alone, we should really cut down on cattle cultivation, really. And but on the other hand, unfortunately, not only is it permitted, it is being promoted in North America. and as if the Americans aren't eating enough beef, they have to import even more beef from Argentina. And Argentina has to hack out a lot of tropical rainforests to create short-term beef cultivation sites that does not last 3 or 4 years before they're completely wiped out because the soil is not very rich there. And so we have to really look right back into the roots of these problems to find the root cause of the problems so that we can come up with the right solutions. And however, there is one problem with Craig's reserve design, which has been keeping it from becoming a reality. And that is how much it would cost to create and implement. I once had a quick conversation with Craig, and I asked him, "Hey, Craig, how much do you think your reserve design would cost in terms of a full implementation over I guess several years?" And maybe Craig can answer my question now.
I believe that you hit that figure closely in the ballpark when you talked about close to around 100 million to really revamp this program and get it back on track. And this relates to so many other issues like the global warming and the restoration of the ecosystems and allowing the natural ecosystems, which, by the way, the wild horses greatly help restore. And there's a wonderful 10-year study it was put out by ecologists from the University of Copenhagen that show just how important the horses and other equids are in restoring ecosystems. And that's a critical point of combating global warming. So I don't think we're at all out of line when we talk about 100 million. It relates to so many other issues.
Okay,
Let's
cool.
restore these horses to truly viable levels in commensurately viable habitats.
Yeah, so you have put your finger on the button where the difficulty is, and that is that it costs that much money to implement. And I didn't actually start my thinking about wild horse management solutions with this in mind, but after having come across Craig's reserve design, I really wanted to be a reality, and I began to see if my way of thinking can also come up with a solution for Craig to get his reserve design into reality. So the first thing I wanted to do was to get rid of Roundup. For me, just to say, ground the helicopters does not really cut it, because if you ground the helicopters, people in power can easily substitute another awful method into it to replace the helicopters, maybe cowboys, maybe so that is one thing. To get rid of Roundup is far more basic than getting rid of helicopters. Getting rid of Roundup will just simply remove all the horrible social conflicts that has resulted from every single round of Roundup that we see. We are not going to sit back and just enjoy the videos that we take. We are seeing wild horses being abused and being killed in the process of engendering more and more cattle on the public lands. So to get rid of Roundup is a big, I would say, what is that word that Indiana Jones used?
Big step forward.
No, but anyway, it'll come back to me. But
leap forward.
So what we really are stuck on is a way to end Roundup. People will say, just go and physically stop them, which is obviously would land them somewhere very unpleasant. I have done the analyzing and thinking, and I thought, okay, well, the roundup, what's the reason for roundup? The reason for roundup is that they would set a maximum number of allowable population for the horses, and anything above that, they will go and round them up and put them into lockup. And that is the reason for roundup, is that they think that there are more horses than there should be. Now, I'll have to go back into 1990, into say, let's 1870. 1870, back then, there was an estimate that there were approximately 2 million wild horses living on the land and an unknown number of cattle. Give it another century, come 1970, they did another count, and instead of 2 million, they counted maybe 17,000. And the high count was about 25,000. And in 1971, when the free roaming wild horses and Burros Act came in, the BLM didn't even exist. It was the U.S. Grazing Service. The U.S. Grazing Service was then made into the Bureau of Land Management and given the responsibility of take stewardship of the public lands and take care of the wild horses and burros that live there. And guess what? The first thing that they did when BLM came into existence was to come up with an AML, which basically means the maximum allowed population for the wild horses, and they put it very conveniently, just marginally above the high count of the wild horse population back in 1970, and which was, as I mentioned before, low 17,000, high 25,000, and they just put in 26,600 as the maximum allowed population for the wild horses, just above the high count. And all the rest they have in mind to give to the cows and the goats and the sheep. So, so what happens then is that in about 1962, there was this movie called The Misfits, starring Clark Gable, Marilyn Monroe, and Montgomery Clift, called The Misfits. And it is a story based upon the ongoing back then legal activity of mustanging, which is anybody with a car or a truck or a rope can go out there and round up a bunch of Mustangs all by themselves without any permits required. And that story was based upon that, the mustanging, and as a result. And what happens to the Mustangs that they caught, they would liquidate them and make them into cat food and dog food. And so because of that movie, the public's interest in Mustangs was heightened. And by the time the 1971 law came in, there was a certain demand for wild horse adoption. So what happens then was that the BLM set the maximum at 26,600, and sooner or later the horses population would exceed that, and they would go and grab a whole bunch instead of the general citizens and the general public being able to go and grab Mustangs. It has become centralized into the BLM, and they're the only monopoly that can go and grab wild horses out there and round up, in other words. So the idea back then was, okay, well then, there was a good demand for wild horses to adopt. So what we're going to do is to round up a whole bunch of surplus wild horses and then get them adopted out, and then horse in, horse out, and everything would be a steady stream, and a stable population will be maintained, hunky-dory, no problem. So in the first few years, it worked quite well. In the 70s, early 70s and mid 70s, the adoption requirement or demand did meet the the number of horses rounded up, and that was okay for the first few years, and the BLM was, you know, patting themselves in the back and say, okay, hey, we're going to create a working solution. Unfortunately, the public enthusiasm pretty much cooled down after a few years, and fewer people wanted to adopt Mustangs, and more Mustangs were rounded up. So the BLM began to go to the go-to solution, which means to build holding facilities to hold the surplus rounded up horses that are not adopted. And this just became a spiral, and the horses on public land increased to about, say, 45,000 by about 2007 or so, and then as of that point on, it went up to about 80,000 in about 2020, and come today, I would estimate that a rough rounded number of wild horses on land, on range, is about 100,000, maybe 90,000 to 100,000. This is disputable because no accurate count has been conducted, and the number of wild horses in captivity has increased to about 45,000 in captivity, and about 70,000 today, because of the continued rounding up activities from year to year to year to year. So today, I would roughly estimate to be on the safe side that the total number of wild horses on range is approximately 100,000, off range in holding facilities at about 70,000. And so it adds up to 170,000 of wild horses in existence today on and off range. And the BLM, in the meantime, is having a real problem with funding, because, you know, they needed to keep on rounding these horses up, and they have to keep on building up all these new holding facilities, and the feeding and the vetting of all the horses and all that in captivity. And so the BLM, in desperation, came up with a solution which was advanced in 2018, I'm sorry, by the HSUS, by the ASPCA, and a group called Return to Freedom, the misnomer of the century, I would say, Return to Freedom. And together with about 50 interest groups, including cattle lobbies and mining interests, et cetera, and hammered out so-called a solution called 10 years to AML. 10 years to AML is the idea of what they came up with. And this means that they want to reduce the wild horse population both on and off range back down to 26,600 from the new total of approximately 170,000. Think about that. They want to suppress 170,000 wild horses on and off range back down to 26,600. And their formula was to capture, round up between 15,000 and 20,000 horses per year for the first 5 or 6 years, and then maybe slightly less over the next 5 years. And the aim was to reduce the total number of wild horses on and off range back to 26,000 from a high of 170,000 by brutally rounding them up every year and adding to the captivity number and adding to the cost of keeping these captive horses alive. And I call these 10 years to AML a death spiral. Why? Because in 2020, the amount of money required by BLM to keep about maybe 50 to 60,000 wild horses in captivity is approximately the amount that that cost was about $60 to $70 million. And to round up 15 to 20,000 wild horses by helicopter would cost $30 to $40 million a year. And that adds up to approximately $110,000 to $120,000, and not counting inflation. Today, I'm sure it's going to be sky high. Come next year, the BLM will present another request for funding from Congress, and instead of $120,000 million as in 2022, they would have to add the cost of keeping another 15 to 20,000 captive horses locked up and kept alive. So every single year it's going to be higher and higher and higher. The amount of money requested BLM to Congress, which even in 2020 they were asking maybe 80,000, 90,000, 100,000. It was like pulling teeth. And this last year, 2022, they requested even more money, and it was, almost a fist fight in Congress, metaphorically speaking. So Congress does not want to come up with this money, and the BLM will keep on requesting more and more money as every single year goes by over the next 10 years. And by the time the year 2032 comes around, the annual cost of keeping, but by then the number of horses in captivity will be nearly 200,000 instead of today's 70,000. And the amount to keep them alive would be approximately $350 million for the year 2032 instead of $120 million as in 2022. So in 10 years, it's going to triple the amount of cost. And you think that Congress is going to say, okay, we're going to pay you $350 million to keep a bunch of horses alive. For absolutely no point in doing that instead to keep the horses alive, because the general public wouldn't let you mass slaughter them. So what is your solution, BLM? There's no solution, just doing it as the formula of 10 years to AML is dictating them to do, and this is to keep on rounding up horses for as long as Congress will give them money to do that. So my formula is very simple. Instead of having the AML, the maximum population allowed, to be at 26.6, if we raise it up to marginally above the current extant population of the wild horses on plus off range, which I set it at 180,000, there'll be no need for roundup because the maximum allowed population is above the existing population. And as long as we can keep the existing population from exceeding that new AML, everything should be just fine. There'll be no roundup, there'll be no need and no excuse for roundup. And there will be no need to build more facilities to round up to house more and more horses. So how can we do this? What we can do is to reduce the number of reduce a certain amount of cattle currently grazing on public land, equivalent in AUM to the number of horses that are upped in this new AML. So if we're raising, adding so many, let's say 100,000 horses to the mix that the AML would allow at today's rate, then we will have to ask Congress to tell BLM to cut an AUM equivalent of cows and goats and sheep from public land to strike the same food and energy requirement. If we allow more horses onto the land. And that I don't think is unworkable at all, because the cattle population has been fluctuating from year to year according to what BLM thinks that there is enough forage on the forest floor. So it is not for the first time that they would have to reduce the number of cows to fit the environment the way that they see fit. And we're not asking for a lot. I mean, you know, we're asking, let's say if there are 3 million cows on the public lands today, or maybe even 4 million, all we have to do is to get BLM to cut the cow population maybe by about 10%. I mean, come on, let's not be so greedy, okay? And besides, all these cows belong to rich cattle barons that are given a welfare payment by the BLM. The BLM is making a little bit of money from these cattle barons by charging them maybe $1.50, $1.60 per month per cow with a calf, or maybe 5 or 6 goats equivalent. And is it worth it? I mean, these cattle barons, they can afford to go into private grazing. Let me tell you, and private grazing costs approximately $22 per month per cow instead of $1.50 or $1.60. I mean, that is at the public's expense. The entire welfare ranching system costs the general public $500 million, $500 million a year to subsidize all these rich ranchers so that they can rake this land, which belongs rightfully to the horses and the burros, because they are the native species of this land. We've got to set the mainstream reporters straight that these horses are not feral horses, okay? If you have a quarter horse that runs away from, you know, breaks through your rotten fence and runs away and eats out a life in the bush somewhere, that's feral. But these horses have been here for the Equus genus has been around for about 50 million years. The species Equus calibus, the horse, has been around for at least 3 million years. They took a little trip around the world to Europe and to Asia, and then come back with the help of people. Thank you very much, Spanish. And they're back to re-inhabit their native land. They are the native species. And one thing that can really convince you that they are beneficial to the land and the cows are not, is that cows are ruminants who digest all the seeds that they take in. So they graze on good grass, eat the seeds, and they digest the seeds. And in their droppings, there are no seeds. Whereas the horses' digestive system is a lot simpler, and a lot of the seeds that they ingest are ejected back out from the system, and they reseed the land. And that, if that does not convince you that the horses are good for the land and cows are not, I think you should do some more reading on this subject. So now, after we have settled this, and the AML has been put up to 180,000, and the cattle population has been dropped by approximately 5 to 10%, which shouldn't be that much of a moral problem. We then have a piece of land that can support all the horses and the cows as well, if they will just respect these limits. And then if we have all the horses AML raised to 180,000, we can rightfully release the captive horses, the 70,000 captive horses, back onto the land, because it will fall under the new AML of 180,000. And this will, given the 177 herd management areas, or 177 herds, it will equal approximately 1,000 per herd, rather than the current 266 260,600 divided by 177 hertz equals only an average of about 150 horses per herd. And that is absolutely substandard in terms of keeping these horses genetically viable as a herd. And there is a 50/500 formula, which means if you want to keep a herd from getting into inbreeding, you need at least 50 breeding members. And if you want to keep the herd from genetic drift, you need at least 500 breeding members. And this already destroys the BLM formula of 150 per herd. But this is also being criticized by other ecologists that it is not enough. And thus the new formula of 100/1000, which means a herd needs at least 100 active breeding members to forestall inbreeding, and at least 1000 breeding members to forestall at least genetic drift. Genetic drift means the disappearance of genetic alleles. An allele is like a gene that reflects a certain phenotype. For example, the horse that is being shown on the screen right now is an Appaloosa. So there's an Appaloosa allele in the horses, and if the herd is very small, with only 1 or 2 Appaloosas in there carrying the Appaloosa gene, and some natural disaster befalls the herd and kills both Appaloosas, then there would be no Appaloosa alleles left in that herd. Now that's a color, and that may not affect the survivability of the herd, but there could be alleles which has to do with the conformation of the horse. It could really weaken the horse, weaken the legs of the horse. It could be so an allele, if you look at it this way, is like a, what word should I use? It is like an alternative or an option for that herd. The herd with a lot of alleles has a lot of options, and it can deal with a lot of environmental changes and factors. Whereas a herd with very few can be easily wiped out by means of one calamity. So we do need to protect all these alternatives called the alleles and forestall genetic drift, which is absolutely and completely ignored by the BLM. It's not even the factor. That genetic drift, I believe, is even more important than inbreeding, and we all know what inbreeding can do to humans and to animals. So now at this point, we have arrived at, we can rewild all the horses back onto the land. Now, this is where Craig comes in. I would like to hand the design for the rewilding of all these horses in combination with their existing herds in the context of Craig's Downer Reserve Plan. I'm going to hand it over to him in the question period, so that if you want to find out more about how this works, you can ask him. But my last point to make is the one that I want to get to, is how do we get to fund Craig's Reserve Plan? He said he names $100 million is a good enough amount of money to be able to get the ball rolling and get it working on a steady basis. And I presume that would take several years to set up, which would mean, I would say, let's say $40 million a year. For 3 years, that would add up to $120 million. Now, where does this money come from? The money is coming from the government. If all the horses in captivity has been released back onto the land for Craig to get ready to make into a reserve design type of arrangement, complete with a full complement of natural predators, including cougars, including wolves, including grizzly bears, black bears, coyotes, to keep the horses population stable in the wild. Then what we can do, since there are no more horses in captivity, and since Roundup is no longer necessary, by grounding the helicopters would save us $30 or $40 million a year. And by the horses having been released, we can close all the holding facilities, which cost currently about $80 million a year. And that will add up to approximately $120 million a year released, freed up from the mindless and pointless BLM fixation of keeping more and more horses in captivity and fewer horses in the wild. So by releasing all this money out from grounding the helicopters and closing all the holding facilities, not only can Craig's reserve plan be put into action and construction, we can also increase the amount of water available on the land. Right now, you know, when you talk to certain people who've been doing work with ranchers, one of the biggest objections and oppositions to my proposal is what about water rights? The water rights are being owned by the ranchers. What do you think that ranchers would give you the water rights for you to put more horses onto them instead of taking away their cattle? Well, I don't think so. I don't think that they would comply voluntarily. But the ranchers are not the people that we should bargain with, because ranchers are basically they are just tenants on public property. They're just tenants paying a very low subsidized rent. We don't negotiate with tenants in terms of the rent. We negotiate with the landlord. And the landlord in this analogy would be that organization which tells the BLM what to do. And that would be, as Scott mentioned in his walk around this morning, waiting for the sun to come up. The organization that calls the shots is the legislature, are the lawmakers, is the Congress, which tells the executive branch of the DOI, the Department of Interior, that this is what we want. We want to have the 10 years to AML policy put into action, because there is no other alternative that can compete with that. So the BLM is given the green light to go ahead and round up these horses. Now, if you can convince the Congress, and particularly its appropriation committee, that the BLM will no longer come after you for the $80 million just to keep this babysitting service going of all these rounded up horses in captivity. We are releasing all this money for you to put it into better and more worthy application. And that would be to restore the land, restore habitat, to recreate ecosystems, and to, in my opinion, create more water. We do not have to depend on the ranchers for the water rights to water our horses. We can create a new water by using the money released, the $120 million, to drill a lot of wells in the thirsty HMAs. All 177 herds will get each about half a dozen new wells to top up their watering holes year round. even 1,000 wells may not suffice due to global warming and the drought oncoming. But every year we are saving the BLM even more money than every year before that, and we can add more wells. And wells are not all that expensive in the scheme of things. Each well will cost approximately $20,000. So, you know, you factor in 1,000 new wells, there'll be $2 or $3 million out of a saved $120 million by retiring helicopters and holding facilities. So once this money becomes released, then Craig will take over this money and begin his work with the reserve design. But first of all, we've got to convince Congress that this is a good plan, and Craig and I believe that this is the best plan, if not the only plan there is, that can accomplish all these, that can end the roundup once and for all, that can free all captives, that can improve the habitat, and that can restore ecosystems based upon Craig's highly researched reserve plan that I absolutely support. So at this point, if I may ask Lynda to put up that slide that presents the 5 points, I will recap that. Wow, that lucky guy. Okay, this is it. The Marr-Downer Plan, number 1, raise the AML. Number 2, reduce cattle. Number 3, release wild horses for rewilding by Craig. Number 5, close the ultra expensive and totally pointless holding facilities and grounding all the helicopters and freeing up $120 million this particular year for all these meaningful work and necessary work. And then number 5, to repurpose all this money released for habitat restoration, water creation, including drilling all the wells to begin with, because every single year we can improve and we can add. And every year global warming is going to keep on punching down on us, and every single year we will fight it harder as we need to. So I'm gonna retire myself to the Q&A so that questions can come in, and I will do all my best to answer all your questions. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anthony. So, you know, I've been following the chat throughout your presentations, and probably the most common question or sentiment being expressed is how do we get this plan in front of members of Congress, and more broadly, how can we get those in a position of authority, whether it's Congress or the Department of Interior, Secretary Holland, to actually pay attention and start thinking about about a new approach that might include something like the Marr-Downer Plan. So maybe we'll toss that first to Craig. Craig, I know that you have had dealings with members of Congress and so forth, but what are your thoughts in terms of a strategic way of changing the conversation before our lawmakers in Congress?
Well, I think we should approach it from a high level of intellectual integrity, where we present a very well thought out plan and not resort just to sort of freestyle bashing everybody around you, like, oh, I'm the king of the mountain sort of attitude. But what I said in my speech about cultivating humility and trying to see the best in all different people and from all different backgrounds, and then to present a real positive alternative to the status quo that is seen to be beneficial for everyone and to meet these crucial challenges that we face today on the earth. And as I said, there's that team out of University of Copenhagen that worked over 10 years. And they showed that the horse is one of the very best species for, and other equids, but we're mainly talking about the horse, Equus caballus, in combating so many of these dire problems that we face today, like global climate change and degraded ecosystem. And if we can just say, try and approach it from a positive point of view and kind of de-emphasize, de-accentuate negative and accentuate the positive, like the old song said, then I think we can really affect a wonderful change in our society, a life-changing change, life-saving change, excuse me. And, I can't think of any icon, any living symbol more attention grabbing than these wonderful, highly evolved horses, and to a large degree too, the Burros, that, and we can emphasize everything they did for us, the fact that they're actually ancient presences on the earth that fulfill vital keystone roles and that are capable of self-stabilizing. Let's get people, in other words, to think about how ecosystems work. I mean, so many people today, they're really all jazzed up about how automobiles work, how airplanes or any type of a machine or totally artificially created computer or some network. Hey, the natural ecosystems are much more intricate than what people have made. But if we don't respect them, I don't think our artificial world is going to work. I mean, the proof is that it's been calamitous. Are turning our back on the beautiful workings of nature. So I think we've really got to get behind this in a big way and really practice what we preach. We have a democracy, or the semblance of a democracy here. It's not an oligarchy. And we're allowed to freedom of speech to suggest new and better ways of life. So let's just visualize and really believe in restoring the herds and phasing out the livestock monopoly on the public lands, as well as the big mining and energy monopolies and the off-road vehicles that rip so much, or people that are just infatuated with blasting big game, or something that is really violent in nature. And let's get into benign ways of relating and appreciating restored ecosystem. It's crucial. I mean, it's crucial we do so. And I think we can really start as one of the very foremost causes will be the restoring of the herds and their habitats to fully genetically viable levels and as integral parts of the public lands ecosystem as the law intended. And reserve design is which includes so much of the rewilding concept, is really the superior way to go. And let's respect people who have taken the time to really learn in depth. And I think there needs to be a lot more respect, and respect everybody, because everyone has their own special and valuable contribution. But let's not always be trying to like down others. So that would be my recommendation. make this successful.
Let me
And so
just-
I'm planning to go to Washington, I know, and I want to go with Anthony and Scott and Lynda and everybody, and Barbara, and anyone that wants to come along. And let's get in on the committees and the key players, and really have a massive upwelling of support for restoring the wild horse and burros in the wild.
Let me just follow that up. You know, it's when you think about it, it's pretty sobering and daunting to think about the political realities involved. And when you look at the congressional delegations from the top wild horse and burro states, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, you know, you are talking about, you know, you're talking about members of Congress who are very much advocates for the ranchers, the mining companies, the fracking companies. That is, you know, taking care of those interests is literally their top priority. And from their point of view, the path forward, or as Anthony refers to it as 10 years to AML, you know, they've got, on the one hand, they've got, you know, their friends in the livestock industry supporting the path forward, but then you've also got national humane groups like HSUS and ASPCA in support of the path forward. And that makes it so easy for an elected official to just not look any deeper. They can say, gosh, the beef industry and HSUS agree on roundups. Great, that's the solution. And those of us who are actually on the ground doing the work, those of us who live and breathe this issue all day, every day, have essentially been sort of pushed to the margins, and they feel like they don't have to listen to us. I kind of touched a little bit on this on my video this morning, but you know, the challenge, and it is a major challenge, is how, especially in the Western states that have wild horse and burro populations where the congressional delegations are overwhelmingly anti-horse and pro-livestock, the challenge is finding an approach that that will get support from them as well. So, you know, if you think about it, most of those members of Congress that I'm referring to are Republicans, and they are very much into government accountability. They're very much into, financial, and fiscal responsibility. And so, you know, that might be one approach, is to show them the real costs. And I have tried doing this in my many meetings with members of Congress. I have gone through the process of saying, look, this is how much this is costing, and you know, and all the benefits are not going to the public as intended. Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think the solution is to link this with answering the global crisis with global warming. And I've studied, I did an elaborate study last summer, and I got a little support from Love Wild Horses. I published some articles about why the wild horses and burros and all those parasodactyl tapirs and rhinos included are far superior carbon sequesters. And it has to do with their digestive system. And also compared with the cloven-hoofed ruminant digesting fermenting herbivores that are commonly promoted by people. I think if we really drive that point home, is how important these animals are to, needed for balance, and forget about all the negative jargon and all the, you know, people that think that money makes the world go round and nothing else. You know, hey, it's nature that makes, it's a well-functioning, healthy ecosystem that makes life sustainable. It's like Chief Seattle said, I mean, it's going to get to the point where you're not going to be able to eat your money when the world's collapsing all about you. You know, I mean, let's do it in a superior manner, not a spiteful manner, because who's perfect, you know? And that way, I think we'll be successful, and I will certainly increase my efforts.
Let's go to Anthony. Go ahead, and then Barbara. After we hear from Anthony, I want to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. I put 2 points I want to make. Number one, our movement and community really has to unify behind an idea, and all would, if I may say so, all would have to set aside their egos a little bit, and whatever they've been working on, carry on working on them if necessary, but everybody please support one single plan. Now, as I said, Craig and I believe that what we have to propose, that's after years of thinking. For me, it would be 4 years, Craig is longer. If Craig and I both believe that this is what we have to propose is the best possible plan, if not the only one. Otherwise, we wouldn't. I mean, Craig and I are, we're all kind of grizzled now, and we've got gray beard and everything. The remaining time is short, and we want to make it count. And that's why we're here. That's why we're sitting here talking to everybody, young people who are seeking an answer, who haven't had years of thinking behind them. Now, if everybody would just agree on one thing, and that is the first thing that needs to be done is to kill the Roundup. And it's a very, very simple thing to require, to ask of government, is to raise the AML. And by doing that, everything will fall in place. It will end up with the Congress has $120 million a year, and increasing every single succeeding year in doing something more meaningful and something more beneficial to the real members of our society, which are the horses and the burros in this case. Now, how do we do that? And I have an idea that I would like to, and I haven't run it past Craig yet, but I'm going to do it right now, is at a certain point at this year, BLM will ask Congress for money. And when they do that, they will have to come up with some kind of proposal to justify why they're asking for this money. I say that Craig and I, and whoever want to contribute, maybe Scott himself as well, and maybe Lynda and Barbara also, to come up with an alternative plan, to come up with an alternative proposal to compete with the BLM proposal at the time when BLM submits theirs. We also submit ours, and make it very public so that the public knows that there are two plans in competition right now for Congress approval. And I think that, and if everybody backs this proposal that Craig and I intend to come up with, I think that we have a very good chance of at least gaining the ears of the important members of Congress. And if Congress buys into this idea, and I think that money talks. It just, I mean, I know that this is a kind of a low road to take, but money talks, particularly in government, particularly as Scott pointed out, the political parties are very conscientious in terms of their expenditure and all that. And I think if we can convince them that money, that they can save a lot of money by doing something very simple. And other than saving money, if it is possible to terminate roundups, then there's a lot of social discords can be eliminated. Everybody will be happier. There'll be no specter of mass slaughter on the captive horses, because take a look in 2030, if there were 200,000 horses in captivity and the BLM wants $350 million, what is the most obvious route to take for the money conscious? Mass slaughter. So if we don't want that to happen, we'd better get together and fight like hell for them.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Yeah, Craig, go ahead briefly.
Okay, yeah, there was another idea I had thought of. I've been doing a lot of reading in preparation for this. And I learned a lot about how the national wildlife refuges were created and how they got hunters and the fishers to really make that happen. They had the Stamp Act and they had the Ducks Unlimited. And so I was thinking, gee, you know, really get this off the ground. If we could offer the wild horse and burro supporters a real personal benefit in relationship to, say, rather special privileges to observe and be with the horses or participate in studies, you know, really become identified out in all the different wild horse and burro herd management areas, that this would be something that many people would really jump at, because in today's very populated world, I just know there are thousands, even millions of people that crave a reconnection with the natural balanced life community, and have a special opportunity to be with and participate in programs to conserve and restore the wild horses, and to participate in programs to study them and monitor their conditions. I think that would be a real winner. That would be similar to the duck hunters and the geese hunters and the sports fishermen who made national wildlife refuges happen, and other nature reserves and sanctuaries. They had a real special personal interest. I know my uncles dead here on my mother's side, they were really ardent in that respect in certain reserves. This will be for the wild horses, and I just sort of envision that as happening, as being a great tack.
So, you know, and full disclosure, my organization, we've been working on language for a federal bill. It takes a very different approach, and I'm very anxious to share it with both Anthony and Craig. Your immediate reaction to it will be it doesn't do enough to do what you're doing, which is get horses back out onto the range. Our approach has been more identifying the top failures and the helicopter roundups and the adoption incentive program and so forth. Is it possible, and if this bill is introduced in this Congress, you know, immediately it's going to create, you know, there's going to be people talking about it. The chances of it, you know, actually being passed are virtually nil, but it will at least start a conversation in Congress about which direction we want to go. So I just wanted to say that, and I think that the whole concept of rewilding within the parameters of Craig's reserve design, it's a concept whose time has come. The challenge is getting politicians and agency officials to buy into it, because as I have said, this is a complete paradigm switch. What Craig and Anthony are proposing is a complete paradigm switch. And I love looking at new paradigms. I'm very passionate about criminal justice and police in the United States. That's another topic where we need a completely different paradigm, a whole new approach. So, these are all, concepts that need to be part of the conversation. Our challenge is getting Congress and these agencies to that point. Let me jump over to Barbara. Barbara, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, and you actually gave me a perfect lead in, because I want to talk a little bit about politics. We have an opportunity coming up, and by we, I mean every advocate in this country, because it's election time. And if you are in a state that is putting new members of Congress in, especially a state that doesn't have wild horse areas, I recommend that you totally take advantage of that situation, because the people that are running for office, especially if they are going into Washington for the first time, they are ready to hear from you. And if you cooperate with them, if you support what they believe in, and can, because of that, help them, you will then have a friend in Washington. And it's a whole lot easier to get hold of a friend in Washington than it is a fourth line staffer who doesn't care about what you're talking about, but knows how to write a very pretty, grammatically correct letter, which is what a lot of us have the experience of getting back when we approach these folks. And I have that situation here in New York, where you say wild horses to a politician and they say, what? We have wild horses? But if they're the right guy or the right girl, they start asking the questions. And I have devoted time to making phone calls, to hosting town hall type meetings for this guy. And God bless him if he gets elected. I know we're going to have the right person in office, because when I said wild horses to him, he didn't just act amazed. He started asking the right questions. So find your politicians that are running, see if you can be their friend, and see what kind of progress we make, because this is a situation that requires a whole lot of baby steps. Thank you.
We
for
also
allowing
had
me
a
to speak.
sorry, there was a good question that was asked that I'd like to get you know, just a little bit of conversation. We've got 10 minutes, by the way, and at the top of the hour we're going to call it quits. But the question was, is Deb Haaland, who is our Secretary of Interior, is she a figurehead or does she actually have power? She absolutely has power. The question is she using her power correctly or wisely? I remember when she, you know, at the very earliest days of the Biden administration, there was a meeting between her and members of Congress. Chris Stewart, a congressman from Utah, who has never met a horse he didn't want to see hanging from a meat hook in a French butcher shop, asked Deb Haaland, is there a new approach, or what is your plans for the wild horses? And she said, we're going to go with the last administration's approach, meaning the Trump administration. And I remember all of us just like, our hearts just sank in unison. We were all, there was this gasp, all of us across the nation. We were like, what? She absolutely has made the political calculation that wild horses are a loser for her politically, that she gains nothing by advocating for wild horses, and she gains everything by advocating for those who are using our public lands. So yeah, she absolutely has the power. She could put an end to the roundups with the stroke of a pen. But she's listening to forces of political expediency and not necessarily what is the right or humane or even fiscally responsible thing to do.
Oh, may I?
Yes,
May
please,
I,
Anthony. Yes.
make a tiny announcement next Wednesday. Craig, is it at 12 o'clock? Next Wednesday?
Yes, yeah, 12 o'clock there, Animal or America Matters show out of Reno. Right, yeah, we're both going to be on there talking about what we can do to help the wild horses. Yeah.
I think, look, to everyone on this call, it is absolutely important that you have these meetings with your members of Congress. Have Anthony join that meeting with you, have Craig join that meeting with you, have me join that meeting with you, have all three of us join that meeting with you. It is absolutely imperative that we make sure that we are getting truthful information before our members of Congress, and that they start noodling on these concepts that Anthony and Craig are talking about. So again, you know, and I harp on it every week on my video. Call your members of Congress, email, make them your friends. you know, I know that I sound like a broken record, but that's how important it is. And I have had meetings with members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, and when I show them pictures of horses terrified and being stampeded by helicopters, and then show them the dollar figure that costs, they are outraged because they're Republicans and they care about wise use of public funds, and they see animal cruelty and a waste of public dollars, and they're like, what in the hell is going on? So these meetings with Congress, that it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to instantly jump in and start advocating for our position, but it at least gets them to start thinking about these things. So I just saw another, did someone else have a question?
I wanted to relay a question from earlier about whether anyone is going to the Free Summit in Utah in October. They're inviting advocates to go and attend that conference. So I don't know if any of you are going.
I am planning on going. I'm doing it with some trepidation. This is the meeting that was originally, we all called it the Slaughter Summit, remember? And I think it was like, what year was it? Maybe 2017 or something like that. And advocates were absolutely disinvited. They were like, you are not allowed to come anywhere near. And it was just people, you know, sitting in a room for 3 days bashing wild horses and wild horse advocates. Remarkably, this year, the organizers of that meeting have taken the step of reaching out to advocates and inviting advocates to be part of the conversation. And my attitude is, why not? Why not at least go? And even if I just sit there and listen so that I can understand, you know, other perspectives, fine. If I have an opportunity to talk about some of these concepts with people who are in a position of power, there will be members of Congress, their staffs will be there. There will be, I don't know about the governors themselves, but you know, if not the governors themselves, their staff. I'm told that Tracy Stone Manning might be there. So I think it's an opportunity. I'm trying to really keep my expectations reasonable as to what might come out of it. But at this point, what do we have to lose? I mean, we're banging our heads against the wall. And so if there's a new opportunity, which maybe this is, I mean, why not? Why not at least, you know, go and be part of that conversation to the extent that it might open some minds.
And can I gear us away from politics for just a minute? I promised someone who could not attend tonight that I would ask this question.
Sure.
And she wanted it specifically directed towards Craig, but I'd like all of you to pipe in if you could. She wants to know if there is documentation that wild horse herds will self-regulate their population. And I've already had this conversation with Craig. I know he believes we are underpopulated, not overpopulated, but it's an important answer when you're having these conversations with non-advocates who need to become advocates.
Okay, you want me to talk about that?
Yeah.
Please.
Craig, you go first.
Yeah, well, I had elaborate population ecology courses and as well as a lot of field experience. And I know that the horses, both the horse and burros, are what population ecologists call climax species that are capable of self-limitation, self-stabilization of their population numbers. And this they do when they fill their niches and when the resources become more limiting. And also when they're allowed to have mature social structures which the elder horses repress the reproduction in the younger horses. These roundups countermand all those sane natural controls. And another thing is that our government officials are not allowing them to fill their ecological niches in their legal areas which would lead to their self-stabilization. And that's the beauty of reserve design. It's by having complete habitats that are adequate to truly long-term viable, genetically viable populations. If you were in various ways able to limit their expansion and let them fill their niches within those designated reserves, which would have to be established by caring people that really care about wild horse and burros, not people trying to give them the shaft, you know, and the short end of the stick. Then you could see self-regulating, self-stabilizing populations. But look, if you're always taking the horses and burros down to a woefully inadequate sub-viable population, of course they're going to struggle to rebound. So that's like torturing them. So we've really got to stand up for these wonderful presences, and we have to estimate all the wonderful good things they do, including they're very inspiring people who don't have their head in their so-called, you know, vested interests, and they can't see. We can do it, you know, but we've really got to stand up with spirit and belief. And believe me, the wild horses are on our side, and that's a wonderful partner. And so we can do it. I'm sure we can. We just have to be dedicated.
Let's hear from Anthony, and then I think we should probably call it an evening. But Anthony, go ahead.
Would Barbara please ask the question again?
Yeah.
The question is whether or not there is documentation that wild horse populations will self-regulate without all of this interference that's going on.
Yeah, I wanted to say there is documentation on herds such as the Heber and the Montgomery Pass and the Surbot and several other herds throughout the United States have documentation. Go ahead, Anthony.
Oh, documentation. I've got to think about this for a moment. Lynda, do you have anything to say about that?
I hear. Can I jump in just real quick? And we've got 1 minute. But look, I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that if ecosystems are allowed to recover, that wild equids absolutely have a role to play. We are seeing that wild burros are an important source of sustenance for mountain lions in the desert Southwest. We know that among the Virginia range horses that live outside of Reno, some years 90% of the foals are taken by mountain lions and coyotes. There is absolutely empirical data out there that shows that if native carnivore populations are not artificially suppressed for the benefit of the livestock, that they and the wild equids will go back to that ancient relationship that they've had for eons, where they struck the right balance and they kept each other healthy. And I think that is what we're striving for. But there has to be a recognition of the value of a fully functional ecosystem. So that's what I would say. And I would say that a lot of this is new science, but scientists are starting to pay attention to the importance of these wild equids for other wildlife species.
How I was stumped by Barbara's question was documentation. I do not have that, but I have a very strong theoretical belief that the wild natural predators are of prime importance to any ecosystem for it to strike a balance. If it's strictly herbivores and the carnivores are all removed by hunters as competition for game, so-called, or you know, that would I mean, wild predators to me are an integral part of an ecosystem that given everything there running properly and in proper proportion, that the ecosystem will be able to self-regulate. And I agree with Craig on that. In the absence of predators, I am slightly more doubtful than Craig is in terms of the herd's absolute capability of regulating its own population. But I can also see that because I have worked with white-tailed deer, urban white-tailed deer as well, and I can see how they could regulate their own reproductive rate in the situation of low food supply. Instead of triplets and twins, they would have singlets, or they may not have any at all. And but I also think that for the deer to be able to start regulating its population in terms of its reproductive rate, they would have felt that the environment is already a little bit strained due to overconsumption. So with the predators, they will feel very comfortable that they will strike a balance. Very comfortable. Without them, I think we may have to introduce the predators. That's.
But in some species, like bears, for example, without natural predators besides humans, really, when there is not enough food to sustain them, they will, sorry about my dogs, they'll miscarry, and that keeps the population down. And I don't know if that happens with horses, but I would suspect that if a horse is not in good physical condition to sustain a pregnancy, that would happen, and that would keep the population at bay without predators. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah. In the horses and burros, there is such a thing called as delayed implantation, and if the mare doesn't have sufficient nutrition, it can actually delay the implantation of the embryo in the uterus. And generally, as the resources decline, there's less emphasis on reproduction and more on individual survival. And that's been proven in many species, including equids like horses and zebras and asses. Remember, especially those that live in very harsh, dry deserts, they have to develop those capacities in order to survive. And the very fact that they have survived for thousands or even millions of years show that they are capable of self-limitation.
Okay, well, listen, folks, we could go on. I love this conversation, and I would, if my wife and my crazy dog Divvy would let me, I'd sit here and have this conversation all night. But I want to respect everyone's time, and Craig and Anthony, so much gratitude to you for your thinking on this, for your leadership, and for your willingness to, put your ideas out there for discussion and examination. I have so much respect for you for being willing to talk to all of us and share your thoughts and your ideas. And extra gratitude to Barbara once again, and Equine Collaborative for hosting this. Really, Barbara, you work so hard. Please know that your hard work is very much appreciated, and please don't stop, because these conversations are exactly what I think we need. So Barbara, do you want to have the final word?
I would love to have the final word, and it would be thank you to all four of you. I think that this has been the definition of the word collaboration, because without Anthony, Craig, Lynda, and Scott all working together, we would not be here tonight. So thank you for your time and your effort, and let's leave it as an open invitation to do this again.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Scott. Thank you,
Bye.
Lynda. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Craig. Talk to you later,
Thank
Craig.
you. Yeah, talk to you later. Okay,
Forever
great.
grateful.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. It's,
Craig, I'm private messaged you
Oh,
earlier
oh.
today or yesterday, but I need to get some of your books
oh,
for,
great.
for a
Okay.
music for Mustangs thing I'm doing. So I want to have some of your
Yeah.
signed books to auction off or.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll get in touch with
And
you.
Anthony Marr, oh my God, thank you. And Lynda Logan, thank you. And Barbara Moore,
Sure.
thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I
Thank
leave
you.
now.
You can leave
right,
now.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, thanks.
Bye.